This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one, the only, Cam Lau. It is Monday, March 4th, 2024, and you are currently listening to the 64th episode of my podcast. Benjamin Franklin said, "Never confuse motion with action." President Biden has finally managed to give out some minimal student loan forgiveness money. After all of his big campaign promises, he was starting to be called out by young voters whose support he desperately needs in this next election. With only 74,000 borrowers getting any of these relief funds, it's pretty clear that the whole stunt is just a way to show that that's the direction the Biden administration wants to go, so he needs young voters to support him. He's just trying to buy their vote. But I'm doubting that that will be enough for many of the youngsters out there. The Democrats have got a vast majority of millennials locked down, but millennials are mostly in their 30s anymore. They don't have to worry about winning that demographic, but my own generation, Gen Z, that might be a different story. Way back like 50 years ago, the liberals were the rebellious hippies and the conservatives were Bible-thumping nerds. Oh, how the turntables, as Michael Scott would say, as the hippies have grown up and tried to raise their own children to be a bunch of free-spirit homosexuals, just to end up finding their kids running off to the most orthodox churches they can find. Democrats are deathly afraid of this flip-flop in our culture, and thus they need student loan forgiveness. They need legal marijuana, and they need whatever other policies that they can enact that will attract young people to their side. I think we've forgotten that the Zoomer generation has grown up mostly. It currently includes anyone from 12 to 27, and many of them are not falling for the liberal propaganda anymore. I actually attribute the conservatism of Gen Z to the liberal stronghold on our institutions. Every young person wants to go against the grain and rebel to some degree. And growing up, we never experienced the trust in those institutions that our baby boomer grandparents enjoyed. We saw right through the propaganda in our education and in our media. This distrust in the government led to what I believe to be a majority of Gen Z taking on truly libertarian belief. These libertarian beliefs lined up well with Donald Trump's populist message in 2016. And as more of our generation reach the voting age, Trump's popularity continues to grow among the younger crowd. Putting aside the media or growing up under the Obama administration or even our extremely liberal education, I think the real nail in the coffin for Democrats was COVID. Our generation was kicked out of school, our lives were shut down, and the economy was crippled just as we were coming into the adult world. Now, I don't think any of that can reasonably be used as an excuse for any troubles that we have, but experiencing the authoritarian experiment that our government conducted on us in 2020 has left a real bad taste in our mouths. Don't let me deceive you, Democrats do still hold a majority of Zoomers in their back pocket, but that majority is slim, and just because they're Democrats certainly does not mean that they will support Joe Biden or even the current Democratic establishment. According to Harvard polling, 64% of Gen Z voters approve of Donald Trump. So while not all of them are totally conservative, most would rather see Trump fix the economy than let Sleepy Joe continue his reign of terror. The economy was actually the top issue among Gen Z voters, which is shocking to me considering that social issues are typically much more important to this demographic. Even other generations in the poll all supported Trump. But Gen Z was the widest spread, with even more support than the boomers. It's been 4 years since Trump last ran for president, so this election has had 4 more years worth of Gen Z voters that will be overwhelmingly voting for Trump. So in summary, if Trump doesn't win, the whole election is a sham. Probably, or maybe, I don't know. What I do know is that we're getting very close here at the Conservative American Message to dropping some of our own merch. I'm currently working on some deals with some distributors, but in the coming weeks, I think we should have some t-shirts available, so be checking social media for that announcement. If you are interested, though, please reach out and let me know so I make sure we have adequate supply. The Supreme Court is currently hearing a case over state legislation passed in Texas and Florida that supposedly protects free speech on social media platforms. Texas and Florida have both become well known as conservative states, and Big Tech has notoriously silenced conservatives on their platforms. So at first glance, this seems just like evil tech companies are at war with common sense constitutional legislation. I mean, it's freedom of speech, right? Well, I'm going to challenge you to think again. First of all, what does the Constitution actually regulate? Businesses or the government? Who is required to allow free speech? A business can refuse service to a customer for any reason, even if it's unethical. The government, however, does not have the right to force businesses to allow for free speech at the expense of the business's own rights. Telling Facebook that they cannot censor political speech that their moderators disagree with will have similar consequences to forcing a Christian baker to bake a cake for a gay wedding. And as much as I think that these tech giants are truly evil and should not be censoring conservative speech, I'm far more concerned about setting a precedent that the government should force businesses to conduct themselves how the government sees fit. Big tech is frightening, but not nearly as frighteningly devastating as big government can be. I hope that the Supreme Court understands this, and the conservative justices that have the majority decide to let this battle go so that we still have a chance to win the war. There is a greater problem in all of this. Twitter, for example, but all of the other companies as well, have been proven to have colluded with the FBI to suppress certain news stories that would have had a major impact on the 2020 election. This is all made totally public after Elon took over the company and exposed Twitter. Yet, there are still no investigations because the Federal Bureau of Investigation is the one committing the crimes. So while I can appreciate what Texas and Florida are trying to do, they're putting the cart before the horse. You can't put unconstitutional regulations on a business just because you disagree with the decisions that they make that were handed down to them through the federal government itself. It's a topsy-turvy world, and I know that we have to take action, but we have to ensure that we make that oh-so-important distinction between motion and action, just like Benjamin Franklin said. Well, that's all I have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week, and stay conservative.